You mentioned RIP Llama. Is there a path to winning for Meta?
I think nobody knows. They're moving a lot. So they're signing licensing deals with Black Forest Labs, which is an image generation, or Midjourney, or acquiring Manus. So I think in some ways it's on the product and like consumer facing AI front. It's too early to tell. I think they have some people that are excellent and very motivated being close to Zuckerberg. So I think that there's still a story to unfold there. Llama is a bit different, where Llama was the most focused expression of the organization, and I don't see Llama being supported to that extent. I think it was a very successful brand for them, so they still might do some part of participation in the open ecosystem, or continue the Llama brand into a different surface, because people know what Llama is.
You think there's a Llama 5?
Not an open weight one.
It's interesting. I think also, just to recap a bit, I mean, Llama was the, I would say, pioneering open weight model, and then Llama 1, 2, 3, a lot of love. But I think what happened, just hypothesizing or speculating, I think the leaders at Meta, like the upper executives, I think they got really excited about Llama because they saw how popular it was in the community. And then I think the problem was trying to, let's say, monetize the not monetize the open source, but like kind of use the open source to make a bigger splash, in a sense, like to kind of force it. Almost, it felt forced, like developing these very big Llama 4 models to have like the best, like to be on the top of the benchmarks. But I don't think the goal of Llama models is to be on top of the benchmarks, beating, let's say, ChatGPT or other models. I think the goal was to have a model that people can use, trust, modify, understand it. So that includes having smaller models. They don't have to be the best models. And what happened was just these models were, of course, like the benchmarks suggested they were better than they were, because I think they had like specific models trained on preferences that they perform well on the benchmark. So it's kind of like this overfitting thing to kind of force it to be the best. But then at the same time, well, they didn't do the small models that people could use. And I think that no one could run these big models then. And then it was kind of like a weird thing. And I think it's just because people got too excited about headlines pushing the frontier. I think
And
that's
too much like on the benchmarking side.
Yeah.
Like
Just too much.
I think it imploded under political, like internal political fighting and misaligned incentives. So I think the researchers want to build the best models, but there's a layer of organization and manager that is trying to demonstrate that they do these things. And then there's a lot of pieces and rumors where how like some horrible technical decision was made and how that comes in. And it just seems like it kind of got too bad where it all just crashed out.
Yeah, but we should also like give huge props to Mark Zuckerberg. I think it comes from Mark, actually, from Mark Zuckerberg, from the top of the leadership, saying open source is important. I think that's like that. If the fact that exists means there could be a Llama 5 where they learn the lessons from the benchmarking and say we're going to be GPT-OSS and provide really awesome library of open source.
What people say is that there's a debate between Mark and Alexander Wang, who is very bright, but much more against open source. And to the extent that he has a lot of influence over the AI org, it seems much less likely, because it seems like Mark brought him in for like a fresh leadership aid in directing AI. And if the like open or closed is no longer the defining nature of the model, I don't expect that to be a defining argument between Mark and Alex. So like they're both very bright, but I have a hard time understanding all of it, because Mark wrote this piece in July of 2024 maybe, which was like probably the best blog post at the time saying the case for open source AI, and then July 2025 came around and it was like we're reevaluating our relationship with open source. So it's just kind of like,
but I think also the problem, not the problem, but I think, well, we may have been a bit also too harsh, I think, and that caused some of that, because I mean, we as open source developers or the open source community, because I think even though the model was maybe not what everyone hoped for, it got a lot of backlash. And I think that was a bit unfortunate, because I can see that as a company, now they were hoping for positive headlines, and instead of just getting no headlines or not these positive headlines, in turn they got negative headlines, and then it kind of reflected bad on the company. And I think that is also something like where it's maybe a spite reaction, almost like, okay, we try to do something nice, we try to give you something cool like an open source model, and now you are like, kind of like being negative about us, even like for the company. So in that sense, it looks like, well, maybe then we'll change our mind, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where the dynamics of discourse on X can lead us as a community astray, because sometimes it feels random. People pick the thing they like and they don't like, and you can see the same thing with Grok 4.1 and Grok Code Fast 1. I don't think vibe-wise people love it publicly, but a lot of people use it. So if you look to Reddit and X, they don't really give it praise from the programming community, but like they use it. And the same thing probably with Llama. I don't understand the dynamics of either positive hype or negative hype. I don't understand it.
I mean, one of the stories of 2025 is the US feeling the gap of Llama, which is like all the rise of these Chinese open weight models, to the point where I'm like, that was the single issue I've spent a lot of energy on in the last 5 months, is like trying to do policy work to get the US to invest in this.
So tell me the story of Atom.
Atom Project it started as me calling it the American DeepSeek Project, which doesn't really work for DC audiences, but it's the story of like, what is the most impactful thing I could do with my career, which is that the Chinese open weight models are cultivating a lot of power, and there is a lot of demand for building on these open models, especially in enterprises in the US that are very cagey about these Chinese models.
Going to Perplexity, the Atom Project, American Truly Open Models, is a US-based initiative to build and host high-quality, genuinely open-weight AI models and supporting infrastructure explicitly aimed at competing with and catching up to China's rapidly advancing open-source AI ecosystem.
I think the one sentence summary would be that, or two sentences. One is a proposition that open models are going to be an engine for AI research because that is what people start with. Therefore, it's important to own them. And the second one is, therefore, the US should be building the best models so that the best research happens in the US, and the US companies take the value from being the home of where AI research is happening. And without more investment in open models, we have all the plots on the website where it's like, Quen. And it's all these models that are excellent from these Chinese companies that are cultivating influence in the US and China and internationally. And I think the US is spending way more on AI, and the ability to create open models that are half a generation or a generation beyond what the cutting edge of the closed labs is costs orders of like $100 million, which is a lot of money, but not a lot of the money to these companies. So therefore, we need a centralizing force of people who want to do this. And I think we got signed engagement from people pretty much across the full stack, whether it's policy.
So there has been support from the administration?
I don't think anyone in the, like, technically in government has like signed it publicly, but I know that people that have worked in AI policy, both in Biden and Trump administration, are very supportive of trying to promote open source models in the US. I think, for example, AI2 got a grant from the NSF for $100 million over 4 years, which is like the biggest CS grant the NSF has ever awarded. And it's for AI2 to attempt this. And I think it's a starting point. But the best thing happens when there are multiple organizations building models, because they can cross-pollinate ideas and kind of build this ecosystem. Like, I don't think if it just works if it's just Llama releasing models to the world, because then you can see Llama can go away. The same thing applies for AI2, where it's like, I can't be the only one building models. And I think that's like, that it becomes a lot of time spent on talking to people, whether they're in policy. I know NVIDIA is very excited about this. I think Jensen Huang has been specifically talking about the urgency for this, and they've done a lot more in 2025, where the Nematron models are more of a focus. They've started releasing some data along with NVIDIA's open models, and like very few companies do this, especially of NVIDIA's size. So like there is signs of progress, and we hear about Reflection AI, where they say their $2 billion fundraise is dedicated to building US open models. And I feel like their announcement tweet is like, it reads like a blog post sound, right? And I think that cultural tide is starting to turn. I think in July was when we had like 4 or 5 DeepSeek caliber Chinese open weight models and 0 from the US. And that's the moment where I was released this and I was like, oh, I guess I have to spend energy on this because nobody else is going to do it. So it takes a lot of people contributing together. And I don't say that like the Atom project isn't like the thing that's helping to move the ecosystem, but it's people like me doing this sort of thing to get the word out.